Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. I'm your host, Stephen Topham the third, at your service. We're going to talk about some true stories have major facts, which is true. I know a lot of what some of the engines that were in the Thomas franchise have really adult content, right? Major adult content. I'm not bullshitting. There's a lot of adult content on certain engines, right? The first five members of the team always have easy practice, right? Easy, true facts to a very high degree, but there are a lot of through their stories. So basically, what you read is what you get, right? But each generation is totally different because it goes from one person to another, passes the buck, and it ends up with my family being genetic, have to follow suit, right? Don't when you hear these stories in true facts and true when the story's been told to you directly, don't take it too personally or too offensive. To a lot of people, there may be offensive mode direction, obviously, to a certain level degree, but you can't help that. But there's a lot of boundaries where I'm saying, look, you need to start realizing facts have reasons, right? There's a lot of facts. When you, like, let's take a strand, right? Let's take, right, you've done, right, my life is a lot more complicated than you think, right? It's more powerful than the law, the copyright law, etc., going down the line, right? You have to establish that a lot of people's personalities don't often help the situation. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people, like, let me give you an example. We always talk about Daisy, right? And a lot of things that it is totally, totally right. When people think of a lot of things these days, you're dealing with the story is longer than what your money is worth. Right? When you read it through properly, read between the lines, and establish people's lives on top of that, you have to think these true stories have major facts. Major facts. Like for different generations, there's a different type of fact. Facts that could be more facts in between, blah blah blah, going down the line. But the personality crosses over to the next and the next and the next. Right? What I need is for you to understand. Right? You can't go against the Hat member of the family because it's against the rules. It's against whatever needs to be unfolded correctly to get everything in proportion. Right? While the rest are trying to explain it to you from the beginning of season one to his season five of the early years, which is where we are today, right? You have to establish, yes, this time, this Thomas stories, the Thomas and Friends stories, are in a time loop. So even if it happened before, you have to acknowledge it's still going forward. Of course, there are people that think they know it all, right? Which I do know. The Hat family always have records and regulations in their heads, right? You cannot, in any shape or form, right? The police can only get involved if there was major problem, but there isn't. It's just the facts unfolding correctly, right? We all understand there is one engine out of all of them that's going to be a pain in the ass, right? You have to establish it's a true story with that major fact in it, right? A lot of them, right? When my friend from America stated the whole thing has got loads and loads of facts, right? A lot of truth. But in my grandfather's era and Sir Topham Senior's era, right, it's a different time then, right? You got to feel like, okay, it's the early years, it's very beyond, it's beforehand, and you got to establish yourself, right? These facts are no lies, right? The lies are always done by the diesel team, right? So I established that, right? When I look into things, or I read the Thomas Tank books or look at the pictures, I understand what's unfolding, right? You have to establish I'm a really useful engine, but at the same time, what a lot of it, whatever's coming out of my mouth, you have to accept it as a fact, right? We established there's a lot of people that could be like, we have a problem, sir. We got this problem, and I said, don't even go there, right? We are trying to help you. We try to guide you through these true stories, but there are ones, a few of them, even a few. I think there's about one. I think out of all of them it's got a very, very nasty, not nasty, how would I put this? When you think of a true story unfolding in the correct way and fashion, right? A lot of people say, right, let's talk about, right, Thomas, Henry, Edward, Henry, Gordon, James, Percy, Toby, Duck, Donald and Douglas, Oliver, Emily, and all the rest of them. They all unfold for a reason, right? But there's 5 generations or 6 generations of every ancient, right? You have to be realistic, right? That Daisy, let's just take Daisy's as example, is a lot more complicated storyline because that she's based on the 1950s, 1900s. We all used to take things for granted, right? But we have to establish that a lot of the things that are unfolded or unfolding correctly, right, may not be always, you know, when the cops get involved, they tend to think they are always in the right all the time. I said, if you witness something that's unfolding correctly, don't intervene because a lot of people say, look, okay, we got a problem, right? Right, let me put this in another perspective for you. Right, when you split the story in, and split the characters up, right, you got a timeline of themselves, right? We establish that there is a bigger picture involved, right? Okay, it's a lot harder to establish to know what is right from wrong half the time, but it's what unfolds in natural course. Now, a lot of some of these true stories have major facts that go beyond your comprehension and your understanding, right? When you were a kid and you were listening to it as a story, your mother, father, and your grandfather probably passed it on to him and all of that. It goes down a chain all the time for all of us. But we have to establish that you have to put yourself, the diesel team will ever be grateful. They won't be grateful straight away. They won't care about the steam team at this moment. They at this moment we are two separate entities. Why? You're asking for the truth, right? You want the truth behind the actual problem why we have this conflict. It's not your fault. It's not the cop's fault. It's not anybody else's fault. It's understanding. It's one thing that makes us whole, right? It's the understanding of the facts that are coming out to light and people can't fully understand it. You have to establish that one engine out of all of them has a bad problem, right? We know from experience and everything else, we got knowledge that can help many people. I'm not saying one or the other. It's a shame that one person can mess it up for everybody, right? Screw it up, if you will. But it isn't. This is a little bit more in deep. Some of the true stories have major facts that are 18 plus over. I mean, not for kids, not for teenagers. It's strictly for adults. And I know a lot of the stories that have been told are in truth, but the logic is you're getting the truth, the facts, the logic. Why? You're asking yourself a question. Why are the theme songs so bloody powerful? Real life music. Why? During the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, the 20s, right early to the 1900s, right? You have to establish the knowledge I'm providing is a lot more understanding to try and say, why is Daisy a little bit different to everybody else? Well, the thing is with her, it's like saying, like, you want to understand Daisy's predicament, right? She is like, okay, it's odd for Daisy, for a DMU engine or personality to her. It's very odd, right? Certain actions have consequences which I'm aware of, right? But the actual outcome of knowing one thing, then then work out why has Thomas been so really useful, really helpful, understanding, caring, respectable. Why? You see, every generation of the Thomas franchise since the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, going into the 90s, going right into my time, and you're understanding why, right? The thing is, you have to put yourself and realize, why did he call this woman, you know, an S for? Well, you can't be. Well, sometimes when when you acknowledge that these theme songs that these engines have is real life music, and this real life music is what throws the people off. But it should give you real idea. You know, this is not a problem or acknowledgement; it's understanding, right? We all think that every engine that I have on the island are real life people that help me out, establish the fact that they can't, they have to do the story over and over again. Every generation we tell that story repeatedly, right? One day, when I'm not here, people are going to be fucking asking questions, facts. Then another 30 years gets lost. Why? Just ask yourself a question. This is why it's so damn difficult for all of you. Why we're trying to establish why some of this content has got an 18 plus and not below. Why is these there are a lot of people that can say rude words, common words they know of, right? You know, okay, in the 50s and the 60s, right? You had, right, let me put this in perspective, right? Let's just say, right, you have all the steam team, you have all the diesel team through the early years, the modern years, the technology, right? Once you hit that middle bit, that's when you got to have to start compromising. You got to realize, wake up, smell the coffee, wake up and smell that coffee. Why? The thing is, a lot of what's facts, this is what puts people off sometimes. The major facts in these true stories are not always for children. They are for young adults and adults that will understand these words. The words that come out of my mouth, or the words that would describe that actual thing. You can't just say, look, okay, right, we need to prioritize. We need to sort some of these true stories out. Why these true stories are unfolding correctly in front of you. Don't intervene and jump in and say, right, you go to prison because you said this and said that. No, 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 no. Because then you're messing up everything that's trying to unfold. Right? So we have to acknowledge that we've got this very good material. We have to acknowledge that one out of all of us has got a bit of a big, not not the best storylines. They this one is particularly for adults, which I will establish. I repeat, some of the time, a lot of you like Daisy, right? The DMU that we all love and know. But the person that's got that personality today doesn't realise that that's her in general in human form. You have to acknowledge, wake up, smell the coffee, and realise why this theme song that really don't relate to her as such. But then you got to work out her previous generations, generation one, generation two, and then the third generation kicks in, and then people are asking why all this way being corrupted up and doing all of that, right? I want you to be acknowledged to know that some true stories have major facts, but some major facts are for adults, pure adults. This is not a game. This is not a thing to be laughed about. Don't it's something in the true story that could be right. If you're 18 and over, you will understand it. But when you're a kid, it's like saying, right, you need to start prioritizing because there's a lot of it that is related for reasons to the North Norfolk Railway. A lot of it's related to me, but it isn't. It's all to do with the team itself. So when you got all the timelines all split up, it helps the cops, it helps me, and it helps the North Norfolk Railway. Three pieces become whole. Why? Right? You can't just establish. What I'm only doing is establishing the facts. Right? You can't just say, "Oh, you can't say that because that is against the law to say that." But it's the thing is, what happened in the past can't change the past. I'm only going with the facts I was given. Right? The facts that put the truth into action. But the actions are done differently when you see the story unfold in front of your eyes. What's the first thing you do? Ask yourself a question. A lot of people don't even realize about why is Daisy's personality so a little bit awkward. As example, Daisy is not a normal person to work with. She's not the easiest one. Don't get me wrong. I said in my last podcast, I stated that regardless that I'm only going on what I got. I can't always go forward directly with her. Why? Because she's already got ge- her prerogative. She's moved out. She's got something else. Let's say, look, some of these true stories have good major facts you required, but it goes deeper down. When you start with the first generation and then the second generation, then you understand why it unfolded the way it did, right? You have to be realistic and understand why is Daisy so awkward. So really, her story is so different from the rest of everybody on in Sodor. Think about it. You got Daisy's timeline in your face, right? The cops are gonna look at the timeline because it's scripted for adults, right? At the same time, people are not realizing the bigger picture on this, right? So when they look at that and realize how badly this is why 1,000 people got booted, right? Because Daisy's bloody story is so. How would you like to put right? When I look on the internet these days, I do do my research before jumping the gun, right? When people ask, right? When people realize Let me just put in. Let me just get myself sorted so we can get ourselves right. I'm now just gonna meaning obviously not this right. Right. A lot of you knows that the stripper is mainly a dancer, as it is, right? Right, a person who acts and or dances in a sensitive, productive manner, and gradually removes their clothing piece by piece, especially to accompany of music, right? Which is true. I'm not going to lie on that, right? But when it all goes down to black and white, and it has like what you would call a very sensitive storyline. It's not just like a normal thing that's unfolding in front of your eyes. And acknowledge that these true stories have meanings and 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 accommodations. Right? When you think of a stripper, sometimes a lot of people when they go out into clubs today, strippers are well known, but they are very, very hard putting, right? When you look in the railway trade, strippers are not well known, right? I want that to be cleared, right? I want you to understand that sometimes they can be the white S, which I'm not going to mention again because it just gets me into a lot of shit trouble, which I don't want to go to. But I want you to establish this true story of Daisy is not meant for the younger adults under 18 because we want you to fully understand Daisy has a way of being it's the way the story is told for her. It's not just herself as a third gen, the second generation that done it before it, and then the first gen, right? They all done it, right? You can't You have to go backwards to go forwards. You can't just say, look, right, we got this, we got that, we got this, we got that. Yeah. Well, when I talk about the topic in my last podcast, I was mainly targeting about the unification. Why? It's a fact, but it's logic. Of course, Daisy was part of it, but she really is like, yeah. If she could be nasty to me, in a lot of ways and one, and then stabs everyone else in the back. Yeah, well, thank you very much. You just need to stab somebody more powerful than you, but that's not the case here. You see, when you're dealing with the third generation of the storyline, right, it's made it very hard for a lot of people just to click their fingers and say, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. The stories are always true, but they all separated. Why? How many of you actually realise how delicate Daisy's storyline is? Very, very sensitive story. It's not just a pure storyline, that timeline story that you can actually read or on anagram. It's something that is very sensitive, and it's not negative. It's very hard putting to put something in place when you've got it in black and white and establish that the cops will have to be shown that the acknowledgement of it. It's like saying like why they're gonna ask simplified questions anyway when it comes to a timeline that is very, very adult-ish. You can't expect me to jump off and say I'm not gonna lie on that because it's the truth. Because the music, the person, or whatever, or the engine version of her is fine. She's safe as the engine, right? Right? When you watch Thomas the Tank and Friends, you start to pick up these clues yourself, and the facts will come clearer, right? What's the first major thing you think of? You'd be saying drop George, and you'd be saying holy shit. Why? Because you working out the anagram yourself and you realise what's unfolding, right? You're starting to pick up all the pieces, ding, 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 and what happens at the end, right? You have to establish that the stories have truth stories. A lot of it is major facts in every corner, right? You can't just say, look, why is she flapping her hands about, as example, right? The person would have normally knew or would pick up on that and say, look, did you know that that this is a big reason why we can't just acknowledge it straight away? Of course, the major fact puts it all in place, right? Some of the songs, like Thomas's theme, was a little bit different. It's a little bit mixed. Edward's theme is based on Band Aid, as example, but as you tell the story, it adds up, right? The facts go in, and everything gets unfolded correctly, and everybody's hunky dory. Correct. It's not as easy as one, two, three. Don't get me wrong. But maintaining the facts is what keeps the story alive. But you got to realize, how does this story unfold in the fourth generation, and how this is it unfolding in the fifth? It might have some improvement. So a lot of things that happened in the before or middle or after, it tells you exactly what's unfolding, but you've got to let it unfold naturally. So what you're gonna do? Don't intervene, because a lot of what's unfolding, like some stories, like Daisy, for example, which is very, or Bullseye as another one. It's all connected to Daisy, so you're not gonna feel like, oh, I'm scared, I'm scared. Yeah, well, she was scared, and I'm not gonna lie on that. But she made it quite clear. I said things unfold without you knowing until it hits you too late. But a lot of stories that I do give out that are true are kind-hearted, caring, and all that. I I'm in that position because I am in the predicament to give you that major facts to realise, why is this guy saying these things, and they are based on truth and facts. Why? I'm not going to bullshit with the cops or yourself or anybody in front of you. No, a lot of these, some of the, a lot of these true stories have the truth. You've got the Hat family. You don't need to go down my line no more, because you know that I've got Richard and Emily to deal with. So you can't intervene with my timeline. So if you intervene, you destroy it, and then you end up being saying, right, there you go, bang, 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 right? The thing is, what you need to understand, there is a lot of facts that are complete adult-ish to a point, but I'm trying to keep it small so it doesn't get noticed too much. But you got to be realistic to yourself and say, yes, I understand that. Yes, I understand where he's coming from. I understand the magic. I can see the unfoldment. I can see me not going to intervene because it's nothing to do with us, right? At first, when a lot of people pick up on it, they will pick up all the answers straight off. Why? Every story that's told in that book, regardless of Mighty Mac and everyone else, right? They all had real good storylines, right? It's just the way it's playing out, right? Everybody wants to know about. Let's just take it for example, right? There's so much to be gained from it, but it's a lot harder by saying, look, come on. There are going to be a few swear words in there regularly, or something that's not allowed to be used now, which is, I'm only being fair and honest, to be honest, right? You have to be honest to get the story correct. If I don't add that word in, or I don't add this in, you won't get the full story. So what what do, in the day, when people think of Daisy's story, Daisy's story is gonna be that type of attitude, movement, obviously on top, and then you're gonna ask yourself, why is she acting like that, and why is she acting this like this? Why? Something's got an add up, hasn't it? When you take four, take away two, you're going to end up with two, aren't you? Right? So you're going to end up thinking, why? Every story has its truth. And that's because it's playing out again and again and again. Because we have to repeat the pattern, correct the pattern, and sort everything out correctly. By the time you unfold everything, everything will come clearer in your head. When if it's not going to be established to you every day of my life, right? You're getting the truth. You're getting the logic. You're getting the facts. You're getting everything around you. Some true stories have major facts that don't often be completely in the front of your eyes all the time, because a lot of the facts are completely on the opposite direction, right? When you look at yourself and realize how do we get round this, or how do we acknowledge that, or why did he say that, or why did he acknowledge that? It's because a lot of things that have happened in the past, present, and future, they're gonna keep tack, tack, tack. Right? A lot of people would say, right? I'm gonna say to them if they ever ask me, what did, right? A lot of people know um, Daisy quite well, and I'm not going to say that as an individual. I'm not saying I'm backing up everybody here for a little bit. A lot of people that do know Daisy, they know they always keep their eyes below and keep their ears to the ground and everything else, and they try and blend it in there, and they just keep their mouth shut and let it play out. Right? When the story is unfolded to you, what do you do? Right? You're acknowledging that you got one timeline that is strictly for adult. No children, no nothing, right? To able to get that little piece of information in, I have to slip it into one of my live streams to able to make it right. You know, I can't do her timeline as one whole. As example, Daisy's timeline is very, very purely adult, right? If I try to explain it to you now, I would get clipped. Why? Because I may be honest, but at the same time, you got to realize why is he dripping these facts slowly in? Because there's the ultimate key to it. You can't say, oh, he can't just say it's one whole timeline because he will get clipped. Not clipped as a person, but yet the the person that who's got that personality will end up moaning, groaning, and all of that. And I said, well, it's like saying if I said the whole story in truth as one whole timeline and said it online, it's all about her personality, the way she acts. Right? It's like saying let's take a generation before her. Right? There's another person, and there's my grandfather. Right, had this problem and all. Right? You have to realise he had to go through all this shit. Excuse my language. It works the hard way round. You have to accept what's coming out of my mouth because it's the truth. Right? You have to be realistic and say, why? Why is Daisy's timeline can't be told as a whole? If I try to tell you it as a whole, I get banged. Right? You need to start prioritising. It's like saying to you, what can I do with this timeline? It's like there's only one anagram that I can't talk about. Alright? Not in full. Alright? So it has to blend in with something else rather than just her timeline as a whole because it's so different than anybody else's, right? If I talk about Thomas, Edward, Henry, Gordon, James, Percy, Toby, Duck, Donald and Douglas, Oliver, Emily, and all the rest, Rosie and all the others, right? And the rest of the Diesel team besides Daisy. Daisy is like a strict policy direction that she's a separate timeline of her own. Why? You, It's like saying you have to be optimistic here, where it's all true, it's all facts, and it's all logic, but it's also adult. It's not a common timeline. If you think I'm just being like swearing that off or being abusive on that or saying this and saying that, of course she's got mixed up with other people's stories. Of course I got her out of it, right? But the thing is, if you look at her timeline as a separate entity, you will be screwed up because you end up with bloody adult content throughout it all. Pure adult content. Something that I cannot explain completely as a full, as a timeline of its separate entity of its own. I can't do that. So acknowledging that helps everybody around you. Daisy's timeline has to be mixed with all the stories I tell. Why? Because she's an in and out person. She's not just what what I established about her. Her timeline is so unique. You can't mess around with it. Daisy's timeline is all mixed in with all our stories. We can't just say, "Oh, she did this, she did that, she did this, she did that, she did this." I can't just go make it as a separate timeline for her because it's like saying, "Look, she she becomes more mature. She becomes more instead of being the complete opposite we all know as her, right? The porters, the guards that felt really pissed off with her at one point. So am I. So is everybody else. I'm not saying this right. I'm just saying this in general, right? She becomes more mature. She becomes more understanding where everything is unfolding and where it's all coming for her. Then it just click, click, click. Right? That's going to take a little time, a lot longer than you think. A lot of people think I'm being offensive. No, I'm not. I'm being honest, right? So when I'm dealing with Daisy's timeline, I have to make it into little smaller strips every time because she's entwined with everybody's timelines. She's not just a normal person that you could talk to or a person to understand. Right? You have to mix it with other people's timelines, which is making it awkward on me, which is understandable to a point, of course. Right? A lot of people did not realise what her background is officially like, or understand what the first generation was like, or the second gen, or the third. Right? We all had different experiences. Right? My grandfather had her. Right? Previous host, my ad. Second gen had it, previous host. Then me, I get her, and I got the ruder side of her. So work it out. So when you think I know who she is in general, but I'm not wanting to discriminate her out because she becomes more mature in the end, and she'll be more happy and more understanding, and a little bit kinder. At the moment, she hasn't got to that phase where she is moving forward, forward, forward. She hasn't started to realise why. She's probably at home thinking about it, right? She knows it's unfolded the way it was going to be, right? For her, she's adding her next piece in. I got the fourth generation on standby. Why is that? Right, Daisy's storyline is going to be more kinder and a gentler version of her. It's nothing to do what is now. What is now at the moment, because we got that little bump, right? We have to establish why it is unfolded correctly. You have to establish there's more to this story. So Daisy's story is entwined with all of ours, with all of us, not just the Diesels, the Steamies as well, right? Of course, she used to be driving down my Bronx line. Excuse my French. and acknowledge that it's going through like hell, hell, Mary, Mary, right? She did not do nothing wrong then. But when she faced the porter, right, a milk carton was coupled up behind her. Oh, was she pissed off? No offense, but that's what she was. Right? Then you heard then she sulked for the rest of the evening, right? That happened unfoldedly, thank God, right? But that's part of the problem. But when you hear that theme, right, you're acknowledging why it's a stripper theme. Excuse my French, but that's what it was, and acknowledge that these Daisy's story timeline is all mixed with us, all of us. But we're not against her. We don't that. But when it was a shock into the system to everybody, everybody's asking questions, right? You're getting the answer that you want. You want to establish why Daisy's timeline is a little bit adultish and not just a normal timeline like ours. You know what I mean? It's just like she's mixed with all of us. She bumps right. Here we go. When I was not right or whatever problem, right? I'm okay right now. Okay. I want you to understand why is Daisy's timeline so adultish. A lot of people don't think straight like this. Click, click, click. Straight away. It always has to be. It's about common sense of the way the facts are unfolding. Right? Daisy at this point, it's like mixing with all of us. With all of us. Right? I'm not against her, nor should you or anybody. Right? You gotta be understanding. Okay, we can see why the timeline is so delicate. You can't just jump in and say, come to me or and get the answers because I will establish the facts what I'm just establishing. I said Daisy's timeline is more complicated and delicate. Why? Because we have to establish that she's Daisy and myself and all the steam team, the diesel team, the full whack, we all together, but we for her she's mixing with everybody. Right? When she booted up my let's say for the sake of argument, you had this 2019 problem and she basically was part of that package. Who had to save her backside from being near enough booted out, right? The management gave her a second chance, she blew it. Right? So that's not my decision, right? In general. But in the end, at that point, people couldn't understand why. Well, she goes on to have a branch line and she's safeguarded. Why? Because of that. Because the way the story was unfolded to you, you should knew a lot of the police, the cops, everything else should realise this story is like her timeline. It's all adultish, and it's not like why was she added on the Thomas franchise and why is she here in real life? It's the way the story is unfolding, right? We already established about her background in Generation 1 and 2, so work it out. Daisy is here, alive, and well, you could talk to her and everything, but she's just been rude, right? She established me to be saying if you either come here to work or you can F off, right? Strike one. Right? Strike two was when she hit her hoo ha kit and told her being so sexist. So they should have given you clues and answers to understand why she she been so sexist when she could have apologised and said sorry, sir. Boom, boom, boom. Right? The thing is, a lot of people said there is a reason why Daisy's criteria and timeline was so delicate. It's not just like a normal timeline that you can flow as a separate one and look at it. Because all you're going to do is see what the hell she's been up to. right? At the same time, it's like us, right? Each timeline has a distinguished code, DNA code, the life code, and everything else, and you got to accept, right, third gen factor control and needs safeguarding, right? That's first number one on the hit list. But I want people to understand you have just got normal people on that platform. When I think about the stories that are coming through and unfolding nicely, and you establish, I'm trying to give you a point about Daisy, right? Daisy is one of a kind, but she does blend in with other people's timelines quite a lot. But it's not her fault. This is the thing. Okay, you might think I'm being sexist myself, but I'm not. I've just been acknowledging that I'm taking in the facts. You got music, you got people, you got family, friends, connections, and so forth. She comes in the connection line. Why? You know, sometimes a lot of people make mistakes that go beyond the cop's position, right? So the fat man, myself, obviously, deals with that problem and says, look, we all have to end up apologizing to each other, both of us at the same time. Why? Because our timelines clash. Why? You can't blame her, or nor can you blame me, or make the same mistake twice, which it has happened. Why? You establish that you can't just go backwards, forth. You have to look realistically. You got to realise the porter was like being told by Daisy at the time, saying, "Quality feeble." That's the first word she uses, right? Because she didn't want to take a milk carton behind her back, right? Right? And then she approached me on the same situation with a different matter. She said, "You either come in or you can f off." Excuse my language. But can you see how it rotates with you and see it unfold? But people didn't see it unfold, did they? They didn't realise, oh crap, right? So then it puts me in the shit. No enough. But I proved my loyalty to the Norfolk Railway. Why? Because I only saw her once. But the thing is, things that we do tell you exactly how it unfolded. If I let me explain to a lot of people that don't understand fully what is unfolding and what is, right? To get the establishment of understanding why we use rude words, not common words, words that we just come out of our mouths because why? Sometimes the words we use may have a lingual effect on the way you that a lot of people are not representing or understanding that I'm digging deeper than what you think, and I establish that it's facts, it's truth, it's logic. Right? A lot of people say, why is Daisy's theme so complicated? Or Daisy's timeline so complicated? I said, most of the majority of the series doesn't have her in it that often. Why? Oh, she complained about Annie and Clarabelle, obviously, to be honest. Right? But there's a lot of reasons why. But the thing is, when it's all unfolding correctly in front of you, you got to realise Daisy's timeline on its own, right, is a pure adult timeline if you separated it from the rest of us. But to make us safe, guarded, to make sure that only little bits of it come out of truth, right? We have to blend it in with our timelines to make sure it doesn't get it completely leaked out. If it got completely leaked out as a full timeline and we try to explain it to you, we'll have to make it adult only and everybody will moan and groan because there's a lot of adult content, if you will, through language, right? I don't want to keep doing it all the time like that because it's like slowly telling the truth without not completely damaging the whole thing. But the thing is, it's like her timeline is so damn unique. You can't tell the difference between our stories and her story alone as separate entities all the time. We have to have her on in every one of our timelines. We have to blend in with her all the time, right? She's not a bad person in general, but I want you to understand why our mouths come out the way it does, right? We want you to feel comfortable to understand this is why we say what comes out is true. Yes, it's facts, it's logic, it's understandable. But when you try and put her as one separate timeline, then you're asking for complete adult because it's the way her story started in the first generation, the second generation, then the third, which is nearly like every 100 years. And when it all unfolds naturally for you, right? A lot of people, two previous hosts, used to do this, not the same story, but the first one probably did. And it's a different, right? It's a different type of way of saying, look, don't. I'm not gonna completely judge the book by its cover, right? I'm just telling you the facts that are in front of you, right? When the cops look at that, or when people look at this, they say, "Oh, he what? He called this woman a S word." Well, excuse me, if you really want the full details of that timeline, you're gonna have to wait until the adult version comes into play. But the thing is, it's gonna hurt the third generation version because she's progressing nicely. She's trying to move forward. She's trying to do everything. But we have to establish that she does have her own separate timeline, which goes back to generation one, two, then the third. The third generation is now understanding everything and recorrecting everything that she's done wrong. Don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of things that a lot of people expect that why did Thomas was really useful, excuse my French, and the fact controller ending up telling this side of the story to help people to understand what's unfolded here. We don't want to go back. We want to go forward and acknowledge that the fact is that Daisy's timeline on its own is bloody completely adult. And when you establish the fact that's coming out of my mouth, excuse my French, you have to be realistic and say why. Why he talks about unification in my previous podcast, but slipping the right because the way the story was unfolded in front of everybody else, or or some people know her actions were going to be consequences, and understanding this and understanding that. My mother was there, I was there, did this, did that, boom, boom. The first thing that comes to your mind in your head is why is Daisy's timeline not separated? And that's the question I just giving you the answer for. I said if I made it a separate timeline, it will be a complete damn adult version. But I want it because she's blended in with everybody else's timeline. I can't separate them, separate hers to make it one whole timeline for me to tell a story based upon her on her own because it's one number one it's wrong. Two, it is fact. I'm not saying that, but there's a lot of facts to it. Three, because of her music and also her personality background and acknowledge what she does, obviously. And then number four, on any other aspect, then everybody will then flame and cry wolf. Big time cry wolf. Because I did not realise that Daisy was blended in with all of our timelines. It's not just Thomas's, Edward's, Henry's, Gordon's, James's, Percy, Toby's, Ducks, all of ours. We all knew what Daisy is like as a DMU, but as a person, she's like, whoa, she's doing the actions for it. Yeah, we understand that. But the fact is, it's happened before, it's happened before. Why? You have to work out two strikes, then the third one comes along, and then she. All right, I'm not going to be mentioning no more names because there's three of them. Right, the fourth one is more caring, kind-hearted. Why? Sodor, the Daisy that we all try and know and love at the moment, right, doesn't realise it's real life that's been unfolded. Of course, it's awkward. Of course, it's not easy to understand her timeline as a separate entity. If I try and do it as a separate entity, you'll end up with like your minds will be like blown because her story is so the way it's played out nicely and acknowledge that it's all to do with 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 the dancers, the strippers, and all of that, and it's all connected to that. And I said, "Right, that's it. That is a no-no. Right? That's why she's blended in with our timelines to make sure she stays safeguarded for that purpose. A lot of people think that I'm out of my wits or out of my boundaries for her, but no, I'm safeguarding her because deep down I know she's a good-hearted woman. Right? As the ancient form of her, then it shows everything unfolded the way it would. Right? The tanker being connected to the DMU, and if it had a face, it would not be the person that we all look up to or talk to directly, right? And establish that the fact is, bing, 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 you've seen the real life version of that story. And the porter's saying, pack it in, right? And that's the first thing the porters would do. Why? You're seeing what's supposed to unfold. But it's a very complicated story. We've been talking about this for nearly 57 minutes, or I hope nearly 1 hour. I want you to understand and take it in, please. Daisy's storyline as a separate entity is too adult-ish. So we narrow it down and break it apart. We've broken it apart. We're taking little naughty words in our timelines. Why? Because someone's got to take the blame, but we can't because it's real life. You can't just jump in with a gun and say, "Oh, we talked about mostly about this," but yeah, well, it's true. I'm sorry, but it's a truth that that people can't understand. There's a logic behind it all. Yes, Daisy's timeline is not to be separated. If anybody does that, then we can't correct the timeline correctly. Right? When people ask questions like the cops or the police or anything like that, they won't interfere in real life events. Right? That's unfolding naturally. Right? We establish there is a lot of words that are in Daisy's timeline that are unforgivable to a point, but it's established not her in general, it's the character, right? So you have to establish, yes, she is in real life. Yes, the second gen gone through this. The first gen gone through this. So it's gone through first, second and third, but they don't realise it's actually unfolding. Why? Because they can't acknowledge what is unfolding. So when people told me that Daisy was scaring children and everything else, this it wasn't a joke. Don't get me wrong. But the reality factor is that Daisy's timeline is off limits. Her story will be off limits because I'm not saying any more about it because it's off limits. That's why her timeline is mixed with all of us. All of us, I mean, in general. Why do you think we say we keep her safeguarded? Yes, but she's not a separate entity timeline. If I try to explain the whole bloody timeline as a whole, the cops will be down my throat saying, right, that's it. You've done this, you've done that. You spit out the whole timeline in one bucket with all these words, nasty words that aren't, when it all goes down on paper, it's physically understanding why. Right? I'm giving you the evidence you need. The understanding why we have to keep us safeguarded and our mouth sealed about it. All we can do is slip it out a little bit because she's part of our timeline. We can't ignore that. But I only go through what I have to go through to get through saying her timeline is off limits to everybody because she's not a separate entity. She's a mixed entity person that mixes with everybody else's timeline. It's not just Thomas. It's not about the Fat Controller. It's not about the porters or the guards or anybody. Her story is so mixed. It's like I said, if I try to separate it and make it one whole timeline, you aim for an adult story full head on with a lot of words that should not be used on any platform. Right? I established there's a lot of things that you really want on a black and white paper, which is telling you in truth, logic, and everything. While you lot are all looking at me and thinking, what shit? I didn't realise Daisy's storyline was that bloody powerful. I said it is. It's completely adult. When you actually put it all together and make it as one whole time stream, you're ending up with a complete adult bit. I'm seriously don't want to keep telling that story, but in general, when she's in Diesel's timeline or my timeline or vice versa, vice versa, vice versa, we're battling it out because we don't like. It's like saying, yeah, well, she's starting to be nice, kind, caring, and all of that, but when it comes down to the past in 2019 or below, or the second gen or the first gen, it clicks, clicks, clicks. But when it all goes together, the Daisy that the first generation used to know, right, was a was a stripper, right? It's a natural course of it, right? Because it's 1950s, it's 1940s. You're gonna have to live with that, right? So in the 1950s, my grandfather, Sir Topham Hatt the First, did have a stripper, but no one knew who it was, right? And then the music goes with the flow and bang, right? And acknowledging that we cannot have her timeline as a whole be done in the way you. So when you see her come in on a platform for the very first time in Elsbridge, uh, she wanted to be. She was a DMU that was there to support Thomas, right? She did her job. She done what was needed, but she didn't want to carry that milk carton or milk um tar wagon job with her. And she said, "No, I won't take it." And she called me. Right, her first generation did say feeble because that was that time of year. You know what I mean? Establishing it, right? So Daisy's story did start off in the 1950s as a stripper type job. But in the end, it paid off. Goes through the second gen, then second gen gets to the third. And what happened with me is a little bit different, alright? So every generation makes choices, options, mistakes, you know, the way she needs to be. But the thing is, what a lot of people don't get is that if I put Daisy's timeline as a whole without us in it, you would not like that storyline. That's why I kept it hush hush under the radar. So you can see why Daisy's storyline is off limits. That's why she's mixed with us, depending on who's the character is, who the who's her friends are. We always will be. Why in every angle her friend. We're not her enemy. We just can't have her as a separate timeline. Everybody asks, why, when you read the books yourself as adults, you understand that why is Daisy's timeline a little bit awkward or a little bit of this and a little bit of that. There's a lot of understanding in it, right? But there is so much I can only give from my position because I can only push so far, right? When you think of Daisy as a separate timeline, you will not get it. It's restricted as a whole. So anybody that watches uh, the timeline as it goes, you cannot understand Daisy's timeline. All right, it is restricted because there's a lot of adult words that could go. That's it's against the law, if you would like to call it, right? And I cannot go beyond what I can go tell, right? So I'm restricting myself not to mention about Daisy's timeline in a way you can't fully understand. I hope this helps uh, to you to understand why Daisy's timeline is quite an odd one, but it's a one that is off the record. It may be true and accurate, but in the end of the day, you got to have faith in that story the way it is true. Because when you establish some people saying this is true, this is all true, I said it's been true for a long, long time. So when you want her story as true, my grandfather, myself, and my father restricted it for one reason. That's why she's in separate timelines with all of us. That's why we get the blame for the cops and everything else. Why? Because there's a lot of words. Whoever is Daisy's host, right? Daisy's timeline cannot be a separate entity because it's a complete 18 plus. That's why we can only tell what was told to us. The unification is all right. That video is fine, but it's mostly focusing on that. But when it comes down to Daisy herself, we only can give out little drip drabs of it because we have to establish everything else. This is not to upset anybody in any shape or form or direction, right? Daisy's timeline itself is normally restricted because the way it's played out for all of us. So, if anybody asks what a Daisy is like in real life, I cannot give out the details because her generation one, two, and three will not, or not a third generation, but the second generation, the first generation will not be happy with me today. And I want you to acknowledge that it's true and it's not going to backfire on you because it's playing out in front of you. But this is why Daisy has grown up and realizing she's starting to realize and understand everything that's unfolding in her life. It's making it better. So when she realizes that the fourth generation's on already, the fifth generation will be ready, and then bang. And then the Daisy we all know and love will unfold correctly. But at the moment, we can't have her as a separate timeline because it's an adult restricted, 18 plus only. I'm not, what I'm establishing to you all, I am not telling her story in full. Why? Because I broke it down into little pieces for obvious reasons. This is not about who the person or the host is of that personality to establish it, right? There's right from wrong, but at the same time, when I establish that Daisy's involved, or Daisy is this, or Daisy is that. There's a lot of things that the cops don't fully understand. When it comes down to black and white, it's all there in black and white. You know what I mean? When you try and separate her timeline as a separate entity, as a true fact, the cops are already got it as a major fact, right? The only thing is they couldn't work it out in their minds at the moment. So when the facts are there, the major facts between that story alone, then people are starting to start picking up pieces and asking, why does he know you so much? As example, right? I would just say, I know it because I've got history, knowledge and history of the individual, number one, and then the second generation before her, and then the first generation before the second. So work it out like it's going forward in time. So work it out. Everyone had different experience with her in different directions, but this is not the same individual we know today. This is the third generation type job, right? So when people ask about Daisy's storyline, it's off limits. It's not against you or the community or anybody else. And then you're asking yourself the same question. Why did he call her a word that he shouldn't be saying? Why? I know what it means. Why? I established that. But the fact is, it's the major fact in the true story of Daisy. I'm not giving it as a whole. Why? Because every engine experiences her differently. We don't make her whole. We don't make her timeline as a whole, as example. Why? Because it's restricted. It's there for safeguarding her, the person that is Daisy today. It's a Daisy that we are safeguarding. We're not discriminating her because she's the same race as me. So work it out. When it all comes to light, it always shows itself in true colours, right? But you do not want her timeline as a separate entity. Thank you very much.